Poor woman gave water to a dying Hell's Angel. By morning, 2,000 riders filled her ranch in the last hour before sunset. When the sky burned orange like a world on fire, the poor woman named Marlene staggered across her dust-choked yard, believing she had just witnessed death fall from the road. The rumble had been faint at first, then a violent crash, and when she reached the broken fence line, she found a man sprawled beside a toppled motorcycle. Huge, tattooed, leather-clad, a patch on his torn vest reading Hell's Angels. His breathing was shallow, his lips cracked, and his eyes barely open, as if he were clinging to life by a single fragile thread. She had nothing to give him, no money, barely enough food for herself, but she had water. And so she knelt beside him in the fading light, lifted his head with trembling hands, and let him drink from her only full jug, knowing the cost, knowing her own thirst would return that night. She whispered strength into a stranger who might not live long enough to hear it, and she had no idea that this single quiet moment of kindness would bring a storm of roaring engines to her forgotten ranch by dawn. If you believe in kindness, in mercy, and in second chances, please like this video, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so stories like this can keep reaching hearts that need them. Marlene had once owned a ranch that thrived, fields alive with wheat, horses grazing under open skies, but hardship had chipped away her life piece by piece. First came the drought that took her crops, then the bills that swallowed her savings, then the loneliness that seeped into the empty corners of her home when her husband died from an illness they couldn't afford to treat. She lived now with only a few chickens, a failing well, and memories that felt heavier with each year. Still, she endured. Still, she tried. And when she found the injured stranger on the roadside, she didn't think of danger, she thought only of how. Once, long ago, someone had stopped for her when her truck broke down in the dead of winter. One act of kindness had saved her life then. She simply passed it on. As she dragged the biker to the shade of her barn, she felt every bone in her aging body protest. She cleaned his wounds with shaking hands, whispering apologies for the pain. His eyes flickered at her voice, and in them she saw fear. Fear of dying alone, fear of regret, fear of things left unsaid. She told him he wasn't alone. She promised him she would stay until morning. And through the long, cold night, she kept checking his breathing, feeding him sips of the last remaining water she had. When her well pump sputtered to a stop at midnight, she realized she had nothing left to drink, and nothing left to give except her presence. But she didn't move. She wrapped him in her only thick blanket and prayed quietly for a man whose name she didn't even know. Just before dawn, he opened his eyes fully for the first time. He stared at her with disbelief, as if waking in a place he never expected to find mercy. He tried to speak, but she laid a gentle hand on his chest to keep him still. She told him help would come eventually. She didn't know how right she was. Because far off in the distance, before the sun had risen, a low rumble began to build. Faint at first, like thunder behind mountains. Then louder, deeper, spreading across the horizon like a rolling storm. Marlene didn't understand at first. She stepped out onto her porch, clutching her shawl against the morning chill, and stared down the long stretch of dusty highway. And then she saw them. Headlights lined end to end, a river of steel and leather and chrome, engines roaring like wild animals waking the earth. Dozens, then hundreds, then more. By the time the sun broke over the hills, more than 2,000 bikers surrounded her ranch, the entire landscape vibrating beneath the weight of so many engines. For a moment, fear punched the air from her lungs. She thought they had come to blame her, to reclaim the injured man, to punish her for touching someone from their feared and misunderstood world. But instead, they parked their bikes, removed their helmets, and approached her with quiet respect. It turned out the man she had saved wasn't just any rider. He was a chapter leader, beloved, hardened, yet carrying scars deeper than his tattoos could hide. And when he didn't show up at the meeting point the night before, his brothers went searching through every back road and rural mile until they found the skid marks, the broken fence, and the tracks leading to her barn. When they saw him alive, weak but breathing, the hardened bikers who many assumed had hearts of stone stood in stunned silence. They watched him point a trembling hand at Marlene. They heard him whisper that she had saved him. And something shifted in the air, something raw and human and humbling. Within an hour, the riders transformed her dying ranch into a bustling camp of life. Some hauled water tanks from their trucks, others repaired her broken well pump, A few brought groceries, bags overflowing with more food than she'd seen in years. Several patched her fences, cleaned her barn, fixed her roof. One even replaced her shattered window with glass he cut himself. They didn't ask her permission, they simply acted, repaying kindness with fierce loyalty. Marlene watched all of this with trembling awe. She had lived so long believing the world had forgotten her, believing that goodness had limits, that people only helped when they had something to gain. But now, the dusty yard where she had once stood alone swarmed with people working like a small army, determined to restore the life she had nearly lost. The injured biker, now stable, sat propped against a hay bale, wrapped in the blanket she had given him. His voice was still weak, but when he spoke, every rider fell silent. He told them that this woman had shown him a kindness he didn't deserve, a grace he hadn't asked for, and that if not for her, he would have died in the dirt. He vowed that no matter what happened next, her name would never be forgotten among their brotherhood. And so that morning, under a sky washed clean by sunrise, two worlds that were never meant to meet came together. An old woman who had lost nearly everything, and a legion of riders who had found something they didn't know they were searching for, proof that kindness still existed, even in the middle of nowhere. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps more than you know. Before the ending, please leave a comment telling us what part of the story moved you the most. In the days that followed, when the bikers finally rode off into the horizon, Marlene stood at her gate with tears in her eyes, watching the long line of engines fade into the distance. Her ranch stood stronger than it had in years. Her spirit, too, had been rebuilt. She realized then that sometimes the smallest act, a single jug of water offered to a dying stranger, can ripple across lives in ways we can't begin to imagine. And that even when the world feels cold and empty, kindness can return like thunder, shaking everything, filling the quiet places with the roar of gratitude and the warmth of unexpected grace.